Today on the show, we're sitting down with Mike Morgan, a longtime Wauwatosa resident and former city council member who's running for the Wisconsin Assembly in the 13th district. Mike's focused on three main issues, which is making Wisconsin more affordable for working families, bringing real accountability to state government, improving accessibility so regular people can actually get the help they need from their representatives. I've known Mike for a few years now. He's one of the hardest working guys in southeastern Wisconsin, and I'm really excited to talk to him today. So, Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Justin. Really appreciate it. Good to be here and looking forward to it.
So, Mike, how's the campaign going so far? Give us some highlights.
Well, just kind of getting off the ground, working on it the last couple of months. Got the signatures, starting to hit the doors. There is a primary on the Democratic side. Mm-hmm. So there's two candidates. I won't mention their names. That is I don't need to do that. It's all about me. People always ask me that at the doors. Well, who are you running against? And I always say, no, don't. They're not here. I'm here to talk to them.
That's smart.
One of the things I did do is in this past spring, I ran what I felt was a great campaign for a local alderman here, but the other side outspent me 44-1. $11,000 to $250. Most of it was National Democratic Party money that just came in at the last minute. The other candidate didn't even complete their financial forms on time or correctly. So, but I did do 1,500 doors in two wards that are now in the Assembly District. Right. So that kind of, again, goes to my background of why I'm running. I served on the Tulsa Council. I have a lot of experience in the community and looking forward to hitting a lot more doors than that.
Yeah, so the district is the Wauwatosa and Brookfield area, just right on that border between western Milwaukee and eastern Waukesha County.
Exactly. What I tell people is it's all of Elm Grove, which is obviously a smaller numbers-wise, but it's the whole village of Elm Grove, and then it's most of Brookfield and most of Wauwatosa, but not all.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that background. So you were on the Wauwatosa City Council. You worked in PR and marketing, and you've done a lot of community work. Can you just touch on that real quickly and how those experiences have shaped your approach to the campaign?
Sure, 100%. Like I said, I just ended my 6-year term on the Tulsa Common Council. Really enjoyed it. Was head of the Transportation Committee for 4 years. Was head of an aldermanic selection committee when we had a vacancy. And I take a lot of pride in the fact that, as a conservative in Wauwatosa, I worked with the mayor and the common council. And a lot of people would say, how can you work with that constituency? And it was fine. I just tried to get things done. And we can talk about some of the things I did a little bit later. And then in Wauwatosa, I founded a junior Trojans baseball program when our kids were in grade school. That still exists, and still in contact with them. Been very involved in sports. The Tulsa Booster Club, Tulsa West Booster Club, and also on the east side. My wife works at Tulsa East, and we have so many friends in Wauwatosa. It goes between. Broadens the whole city. I always say it's a friendly rivalry, unless they're playing each other. A couple of years ago, the Tulsa East girls and the Tulsa West boys each won Division II state, and that was one of the coolest things that's happened in sports in Tulsa, and as long as we've been here. So.
That's fantastic. No, I love getting to talk to candidates in this environment because you learn about their background, and coaching sports has to play a role in how you communicate with people at the doors, or how you kind of approach knocking doors every day.
It totally does. And another thing I've done is, and it's relating to people. I've umpired baseball games, youth baseball games, since I stopped coaching the kids. I got into umpiring, as a lot of dads do. I know some other former coaches in Tulsa now who are umpiring as, to make a little extra money and stay in the game. Mm-hmm. And you learn how to deal with people at their best and worst moments, whether it's a kid getting hit with a pitch and, having some tears and trying to deal with that, or a coach or a fan getting a little worked up and kind of trying to maintain a level of decorum and let them vent a little bit and move on. And that totally relates to talking to people professionally and at the doors and politics.
Yeah, I imagine being an umpire, you got to hear some. It said the best and worst, and I got to think you could hear some of the worst things said to you on doors, and it's not a problem because you've already heard it as an umpire.
Yeah, in fact, I have people if they say, "Well, I'm not going to vote for you because you're a Republican," I'll say, "Well, let's talk about it," And I'm really more of an independent, and I want to listen to all
Hmm.
opinions and voices, and it's a representative democracy. It's not about um, and the other side is really making this election about the party, and they want to win everything, and you're representing a district and the people of the district, and you have to listen to both sides, and that's the way I look at it, and that's the way I looked at it on the TOSA Council or any kind of community group that I or professional position I've been involved in.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that. You worked for Democrats in the state Senate and in the Milwaukee Common Council back in the '80s.
Right.
What changed? Maybe what changed for you, or what changed for them, and how do you bring that up in your campaign conversations?
That's a great question, and it's true. Going back, I have a political science degree from UW-Madison in the mid '80s, and I was a Senate page at the Capitol, and then I worked for a Democratic state senator and a Democratic common council member who I still stay in touch with.
Mhm.
Um, and one thing I'll say is back then, the politics of the university was very not as biased as it is now. I had political science classes, and they were just I learned a lot, very factual, um, and an excellent education. But over time, the Democratic Party has just veered in this other direction, very extreme and far to the left. And I have a picture of JFK behind me. I'm a big admirer of the old school Democrats like JFK and RFK. Now we have RFK Jr., who's doing a great job in this administration, and I admire a lot. And I say a lot of the Democrats that I worked with in the state Senate in the '80s would now be moderate Republicans if they were in the legislature.
Mhm.
And it's as simple as that. It was a more collegial, looking more towards compromise. Hey, we need to get things done. It's not about, sometimes it's going to be about, yeah, we want to get the issue and the wedge issue and that. But generally, it should be more about compromise. That's what politics is, the art of compromise. And let's do what's best for the people, not the party.
No, I like that a lot. That's a great way. So, do you have any you could point to like a concrete example of when you were working with the Democrats, or that um, will play into how you communicate that on doors, or something that you really did in your past that you admire from working with Democrats?
Yeah, it's another good question, and there's a number of them. But one I've talked about a lot on the Tosa City Council, and it actually goes back to my father when he was in the insurance industry. He really helped support a lot of disadvantaged minority contractors. That was part of his business model back, when it wasn't
Sure.
even a thing,
Yeah.
but he just did it because that's what you do. And then when I started working in government for the city council, and then I worked for the Miller Park project, and a big part of those jobs was, um, again, minority business, disadvantaged minority business support. And I know a lot of people talk about, DEI and where we're going with
Mhm.
that, but we're talking about dollars and cents when you talk about helping disadvantaged contractors. It's a legitimate program with, like the State Department of Transportation, that has worked very well over the years. And if
Mhm.
legitimate contractors get jobs and money, um, with a little bit of an advantage there. And I've pushed for that in TOSA. So when we have um, TIF projects, tax
Mhm.
incremental finance districts, where the city is giving a tax advantage, we have an incentive that I push for in our programs and was supported by everybody, um, to incentivize them to bring in disadvantaged workers uh, on the project from certain zip
Mhm.
codes, and local workers, not out of state, and local contractors and minority contractors. And that's worked very well. I'm very proud of it. Other governments have done it. The city did it. The Switch District has done it. And again, that's some practical experience that I would bring to the job.
No, I think that's something that a lot of folks can agree upon, is that, making sure that these big projects, anything in that realm is handled locally, and that money is then going back into the community and back into the local economy is
Right. When I
is
worked at
important.
Miller Park, we had a program and it was a 25% goal and we
Hmm.
achieved it. And then that in turn worked for the Fiserv Forum and some of the other private projects, big ones like Northwestern Mutual. And as well as bringing people into the trades, we had some incentives for that. And that's another big issue that I'd like to get involved in is seeing how we can get more younger people into the trades. That's a big issue. You know, you don't have to go to college and increase debt. If
Hmm.
our son's friends are doing it now. They're electricians, they're plumbers, they have no debt and they're making six figures and buying houses and getting married and having kids.
Yeah,
Those are our new.
I told this story. We interviewed Laura Kokum, who was with ABC, the Association of Building and Contractors, and we were talking about how a lot of the people that go to my daughter's school, they're in the trades. They're, in HVAC and all those sort of things, and they're making quite a bit of money, and having a lot of success in that. And if I was any better with my hands, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I'd be out doing what they're doing, and making a way more money.
Yeah, it's got it. We got to push that more, and people are.
Mhm.
And some of the schools, I give them credit where they're doing that. They've had a great program here in Wauwatosa, a trades program that has grown over the last few years, and we need more of that. We really do.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about your campaign for the assembly here. So you kind of running on the three A's, right? You call it
Mhm.
affordability, accountability, and accessibility.
Mhm.
Can you walk us through what each of those mean in practical terms for the district and for the voters?
Yeah, absolutely. To me, affordability, and of course that's the buzzword now. You know, it's
Mhm.
become cliche. One of the things I hate cliches. I try to avoid them. When I worked at Harley, everything was iconic and cool, and we would try like that's just a cliche. If you have to say you're iconic and cool, you're really not. And if we're just throwing this affordability around like a cliche, it doesn't mean anything. But to me, it means in state government and my background in the city is trying to keep the tax rate down and make people be able to afford their homes and not have these massive tax bills. And I know, we went through that surplus issue. I'm not going to get into the weeds there, but we need to work towards a compromise there where we can provide more incentives to cities and local governments and school districts to they can get money from the state. We can give them shared revenue, but it needs to be, and that goes to my next
Mhm.
A is accountability. Okay, we can't just you don't just give people money and say, okay, here you go. You know, when I was a kid, my dad gave me money, and you know, I had to work for it. You know, I had
Right.
to cut the grass and shovel snow, and there's some accountability there. Um, and that's the same with these local governments. Recently went through something in Wauwatosa. We merged our fire department with West Dallas, and a big part of that was getting these innovation grants from the state of Wisconsin, and that was an incentive to bring in some state money. They essentially said, well, you need to be more efficient with your fire department, but not reduce safety. And that was a very complicated issue and process that we went through, but we ended up supporting it. I really wanted to see that the rank and file uh, workers on the line, on the trucks, and in the
Yeah.
station supported it, and they did. So, and then the last thing I'd say is accessibility to me means government has just gotten way too big at all levels. The federal is obvious. The state, again, having worked there in the 80s and seen this massive growth of state government over my lifetime,
Mhm.
um, just the bureaucracies and the waste, and same in local governments. The county, you go down to the city and our school districts. Okay, we're getting these big referendums, but where is the money going? I want to support teachers and administrative staff people and build that up, but we don't need the money going to the administrative buildings and the bureaucracy. Let's give it to the teachers and the students and the people that really need it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. especially at the school level, like you said, that there's people out there, there's so much waste in the schools that when you find out, they're spending tens of thousands of dollars per student, what actually gets down to the classroom is really, really questionable
Right.
sometimes.
And that hurts the morale of the school
Mhm.
districts. If the teachers aren't happy and the staff isn't happy,
Mhm.
the students aren't happy. And we need to, like I said, we need to, pay good teachers more, pay good staff more, but we don't need, again, a big bloated bureaucracy at a district office um, telling them
Exactly.
what to do and over regulating them. You need to seek balance. And I guess that's another theme of my campaign. I'm really about balance. I know that might seem like an easy way out, but you got to look at all sides of these issues and how are they going to benefit the district and the state.
No, I agree. And you talk about, accountability. I think there's very few state agencies that actually have to report on what they're doing with the money going in. And it sounds
That's
like,
a
yeah.
great point. And one of the things I've been thinking of is I know that Tom Tiffany is talking about auditing every
Mhm.
agency in the state, and I think that's a great idea. One of the state senators I worked for back in the day was head of the Joint Audit Committee, and they were
Mhm.
a highly respected committee that audited agencies, and they picked and choose. And I was at Miller Park when the state audited the Miller Park project. And
Mhm.
they came in and we had to account for every nickel and
Yeah.
dime. Believe me,
Yeah.
I remember I was a communications person, but I worked with our finance manager on it and our whole staff. Uh, it was a good process,
Mhm.
and that's, oh, you shouldn't be afraid of, generally, uh, of a legitimate audit. It
Mhm.
happens in the business community. My son is an accountant. He was an auditor. That's part of the world, and you have to accept that. And I applaud uh, fairly
Mhm.
auditing local or state and agencies and all levels of government, school
No, I
districts, whatever.
totally agree. I think more of that is necessary. I think if you ask certain state agencies, they probably don't even know what their full budget is. And, when you get bloated and you get into the billions of dollars and stuff coming in from the feds or stuff coming in from the state, and yeah, you kind of wonder what's being done with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm. So we talked about this just for a second, but you worked for several years at Harley Davidson, so you have to know a little bit about folks working in the trades. So you mentioned a little bit just a minute ago. I'd like to touch on that again of like how we get more students involved in the trades and realizing that that's a better career path for a lot of folks.
Yeah, it was a great experience. I was on the marketing side, but we would do part of my job for several years was doing tours of the plants. When
Mm,
Harley, they had a plant on Capitol Drive. That's now a U-Haul location. Plant is still there's still a big manufacturing plant in Menominee Falls. Thank
mhm,
God that over there,
mhm.
and we would take media and dignitaries through the plant, and you really got an appreciation for what goes on there. We know that automation is taking over, and you see that, but there's a level of skill involved in running the automation. Well, that might replace a couple of jobs. It creates maybe a higher level job in a factory in an hourly workforce. So I really got a good appreciation for that. And we would also work events at Harley, like you go down to a bike week in Daytona, and you'd be working the show floor with people from the factories. We had a factory
Sure.
in York, Pennsylvania, and Kansas City, and you really get to know that field. And I guess another thing I'd mention real quick is after COVID, unfortunately, uh, I got tripped up in my public relations career. Everybody shut down. And I
Mhm.
had spent 2 or 3 years working as an hourly worker at the age of 60 plus, driving a FedEx box truck, working an hourly wage, working 14-hour days, unloading boxes, loading boxes with these great people on, and an hourly workforce of unbelievably good, hardworking people delivering packages. And I think that was a really good experience for me. Not ideal, not what I planned to do, but I don't know how many people running for office can say, yeah, I worked 2 years in an hourly job, on a hard, sweaty, tough job in a factory. And I worked for Fastenal as well, and loading boxes, manufacturing, seeing how these people and these plants work.
Yeah, that's certainly a variety of experience. And,
Yeah.
you said it's not ones that you anticipate taking
Nope.
on when, at any age really, but, good for you to, kind of grind like that. That's
That's
impressive. Not a
exactly
lot of
what it was, a
people are,
grind, but
yeah.
it was an enjoyable experience. I met some great people. We're still friends and longtime friends. And yes.
That's excellent. Yeah, I mean, your background is really unique, and I think it's real. You said amazing. You go from Harley to other marketing positions at Capco, and
Hmm.
I think that brings a
Engineering
whole
field. I've seen it, how business and public-private partnerships work at a lot of different levels.
yeah, and I think that you said that brings a different aspect to the campaign. Do you think if there's one way you could, or one sentence or two that could summarize how you bring that to the state legislature, could you kind of sum it up?
Well, I think, I have a broad, like you said, a very broad level of expertise and experience in the public sector, in the private sector at various levels and companies, and I would be able to hit the ground running. Having
Sure.
worked for the city, even though I worked for the state government 40 some years ago, I've been involved. I've been around it. I know people. I worked for city. I worked for the city of Milwaukee, going back to when Henry Meyer was the mayor when I first started at the Common Council, and then John Norquist came in,
Mhm.
and I'm friends with Tom Barrett, and um, so I'm familiar with that. I have a lot of friends who were involved. In fact, one of the funny things is I ran for county supervisor in Milwaukee back in around 1990, and I lost, and a couple of my friends ended up getting jobs at the city after that. I like to say I'm the only person who ran for office and lost and helped get his friends a job in government. Usually doesn't
That's
happen that way.
No, not usually. Usually you gotta the spoil system comes after you win. And one of the other things I wanted to ask, you talked a little bit about being an umpire and being in coaching, and just how do you think that experience with the kids at that age and education
So
plays a role in the district and in your political philosophy?
that's a great question, and it plays a very important role.
Mhm.
Having had help have raised four boys with my wife, all in sports and other activities like scouts, and you try to do a broad spectrum. I love sports. I love going to plays. When we go to the plays here at Tosa. It's just wonderful to see what these kids do. So you get an appreciation
Mhm.
for it. I've been a substitute teacher for a couple years at Moto, so that really gave me a good perspective,
Mhm.
especially, and we're talking now about special education aid and increases that we need there. I strongly support that, and I've seen it directly that there's more special ed needs in the schools at all levels. So, and I love that. I love teaching special ed kids and being around them. It's just there's no better joy of seeing the success of these children in special ed. And then from a sports standpoint, I still score basketball games at Tulsa West and am involved in the sports. And like I said, the umpiring, it just keeps you grounded. Um, you know what people are going through. I love being around young people. I love being around my kids' friends and even the high school and seeing the kids play baseball and seeing how things. I would say things are the same and they've changed. When I was a little kid growing up, I just wanted to be out in the summer and throw the ball around and swim and ride my bike and play games and yard games and all that stuff with their
Mhm.
friends.
Sure.
Well, kids, even though they have the technology now, and that's something we do need to watch because it is a big issue, the social media and the technology in the schools, but people's uh, demeanor is the same. The kids want, you're a kid, you're a person, you want to go out and have fun and enjoy life
Sure.
and just,
Sure.
again, seek a balance.
That's fantastic. And then
That's what we need to let people do.
sure. Do you have anything you want me to ask? Otherwise, I think we could go into our final three questions. Anything else you want to highlight? I can.
Um, Not offhand. I mean,
Okay.
I guess the one thing is there's a lot to it,
Yeah.
but I also like to keep things very simple. I'm a big believer in that we are overloaded with information right now. And you can say, well, you're just going back to a different time. Well, like I said before, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And there's a cliche that I don't like, but we just need to let people. I think a overriding theme is let's let people live their lives. We need to have some regulation, a reasonable amount. You need to have speed limits and laws, and then let's enforce them and make people accountable. If you make a mistake, here's one last thing I'll throw out there. The legislator I used to work for, he was a Democrat in the 80s, and he pushed for a lot of Democrats that been, especially in the city of Milwaukee, would push for tougher enforcement of criminal penalties and three strikes you're out and things like that. And he used to reference the Leave It to Beaver system of justice, which I know is an old TV show from the 50s that people don't remember, but it's a brilliant show. If you watch it now, it still resonates. And the Leave It to Beaver system of justice was the slap on the wrist. Word Cleaver saying, "Okay, Beaver, don't do that again. Okay, Wally, Eddie, don't do that again." Well, you got to have some accountability, So that's where that goes.
Man, a Leave It to Beaver reference, but no, you're right. It does still resonate.
I don't know if anybody under 50 will get that, but there's reruns out there on MeTV and that.
Sure. So
YouTube, wherever you want.
Yeah. So Mike, we ask all the candidates that come on this show 3 big questions, help people learn a little bit more about you in a different way. So the first question we ask is, if you could pick one iconic Wisconsin spot, whether it's, a supper club, a brewery, Packers tailgate, where you could hold a voter rally, where would it be? What would it look like? And what do you want to talk to voters about?
Well, that's the toughest question you can ask to a guy that's lived here my whole life and been around this state and been fortunate to, again, go to UW-Madison. My sons went to Whitewater, UWM. I just love this state in Milwaukee and have been a part of some cool stuff, and I could go on and on. But I guess the one thing I'll throw out there, since it's local and I'm actually having an event there, is O'Donoghue's Irish Pub in Elm Grove.
Sure.
And one of the things that's funny there is me and my wife just went to Ireland and Scotland, and I took a picture. And as you can imagine, there's a few O'Donoghue's pubs in Ireland.
Yeah.
And we took a picture out in front of one and said, "Is this Elm Grove or is this Ireland?" So I think that's a good exemplary place of Jamie there and his family, a local business. They do a great job. I'm actually having a campaign kickoff event there on the 29th. So if we can schedule that, but what a great place. And having been in Ireland and seeing the pubs in Ireland, there's a few authentic Irish places in Milwaukee. And around here, like I love O'Sullivan's. Big fan of Laughs in the Village.
Sure.
But O'Donoghue's, having just been to Ireland, is a really cool place. And again, going back to my coaching, I coached one of the O'Donoghue's with my son in Little League Baseball 20-some years ago.
Sure.
So there's a lot of cool connections there.
That's fantastic. So yeah, and hey, I've been there a couple times myself for some events, and they do a good job. So second question, of course, growing up or serving in Wisconsin, what's one lesson you've taken away from the state, whether it's, family farm, small town festival, or a hunting trip, something that shapes your personal and political philosophy?
Well, that's another. I could go on a number of
Please.
things. I've been bowling with my son. I've been bowling with my son this last year down in Bayview, and again, I bowled a lot when I was a kid, in and out of it. But what a great Wisconsin tradition, and you go down there and you're just having a blast bowling with how can you beat bowling with your son in Bayview at the Bayview Bowl with a bunch of just really cool people. Not super competitive, but still competitive. I guess the other thing I'd mention is with my dad recently passing, 95, that he was just a role model for me. And I take so many things from my childhood. I grew up in Whitefish Bay. And I know you believe it or not, he was a working class dude. He grew up on the East Side. He worked his way up. He served in the military. And just was a great role model for me and my family and our kids and everybody he touched. So I think if you're lucky enough to have good family support, it's just so important. And I was very fortunate in that sense. And so politically, I take things away from him. He always said, treat people as you want to be treated, be fair. And he was a good listener. And that's another thing with me. A lot of politicians like to talk. And if you don't, then, then you're too quiet. He's just sitting there. Well, I'm listening. And when I was on the Common Council at TOSA, I picked my battles, and I didn't talk a lot. But when I did, I felt like I was making a point. If somebody else had made the point, I don't need to go on top of that. I would really look to again, be a good listener.
Yeah, well, I mean,
It's
I'm
important.
sorry to hear his passing. I know it just happened, but great that you're living on his legacy. And yes,
Right.
bowling is. My kids just got into it, and it's. I mean, I bowled when I was a little bit older than they were, but they're having fun doing it. Now my wife and I can be competitive again, and
I
yeah,
think
no,
it's
it's a
making a
great sport.
comeback. I think
Yeah,
it really is. I know everything's cyclical, but
yeah,
it is. It's a fun working class sport that anybody can do. And
yeah.
you go to Bolero over here. There's
Hmm.
bowling alleys in Tosa, in Brookfield, all over, and
Hmm.
it's gone through some ups and downs. But there's nothing more Milwaukee and Wisconsin than bowling
Yeah,
and
no,
having a beer or whatever.
I love that answer. So, final question we ask is you get to wave a magic wand and set a day one policy or roll back a policy going on in Madison right now without worrying about getting the votes or getting it signed into law. You just snap your fingers, it happens. What would that be for you?
Well, I guess a couple things. I think the first thing would be, honestly, is going to that accountability and accessibility, just trying to make government more understandable for the average person. People are pulled in so many directions. How can we try to simplify government? Because I think people are just intimidated and overwhelmed. And then they see these snippets on social media, and that's not the big picture. So in today's world, let's try to simplify it. Just showing the meetings doesn't do anything. Just sending out a newsletter or making a Facebook post, you got to keep it simple. In fact, I've noticed that what I try to do with my messaging is keep it really simple. One sentence, two sentences. People aren't going to read a long diatribe or listen to a long speech. Attention spans have changed, so let's make things more accessible. And I guess specifically, one of the things I'd like to see if I could wave a wand, it would be public transportation in urban areas like Waukesha and Milwaukee. I drive around and I see empty buses all the time, big empty buses. And we need to get a handle on that because you're not serving the constituents. Another thing I did is I drove Uber for a couple of years, right?
Mhm.
And I would see people in the central city taking a $10 or $20 Uber ride to work here in Wauwatosa or Brookfield.
Mhm.
And the reason is it's convenient.
Yeah.
They're paying an hour of their pay scale to get to work and back. And the reason is the buses just don't cut it anymore. So
Mhm.
I'd like to see a merging of the Uber rideshare system, smaller vehicles, get away from the big, bloated, old school buses that are really out of date, and riding around empty. And let's
Yeah.
cut those in half and have more, like I said, a more effective urban transportation system. And that can, even though it's the counties, it does relate to the state, and the state could make some inroads there.
No, that's fascinating. And I was just in DC where they have a pretty robust, system, public
Right,
transportation system. But you're right, it does go where people want to
right.
go. And I think, when they start snipping off, bus lines and rerouting them, and it doesn't take them those places, it's not
Right.
effective
I mean, I
anymore.
remember taking the bus. I've taken the bus many times and the flyers and and the buses used to be crowded. And it
Hmm.
doesn't take a rocket science to look at them and say there's nobody or there's less than six people on these buses,
Hmm.
even in busy areas in the city. And that doesn't serve the public. We need
Exactly.
to get people around, and we have to realize we are a smaller area. We're a metro area of about 1 million people. We're not DC. We're not Chicago. We're not New York. And even if you look at other cities and have done some research, some of these systems are undergoing change, and
Hmm.
we need to modernize them. Let's use the technology of the future and not the past.
Indeed. Indeed. So, Mike, last question we have for everyone is where can people go to find out more about you and your campaign? Websites, Facebook, let us know. Where is it?
I've been using Facebook for the Common Council for several years as a communication tool. So it was Mike Morgan for Wauwatosa. Now it's Mike Morgan for Wisconsin. Trying to keep it
Mhm.
simple. Um, and then I think our website is going to be going live today, which is um, MikeMorganWI.com.
Mhm.
And it's some real basic information there, frankly, but it's an area where people can contribute. We're going to need to raise a lot of money, and that's all. I mean, I'm not even talking about that. Unfortunately, big money is part of politics now, and everybody says they hate it. But and that would be another thing. I'd love to figure out a way that we could better regulate the way lobbying and money affects politics.
Sure.
But I do have to raise money, and that'll be there. And I do have an X account and Instagram. But again, just contact me. I am more than happy to talk to anyone. It happens all the time when I was at the city council. And I guess one last thing is, I worked in constituent services from day one. I was a page in the Senate. I worked for a legislator. I worked for a city council member. I've been a city council member. I know I worked at Harley. We had to respond. Customer relations was priority one. So I know how that works. You got to respond to phone calls from the top to bottom, and I have no problem, getting somebody's street plowed or street fixed or garbage picked up. I've been doing been kind of my whole life.
Sure thing. Well, that's fantastic, Mike. Thank you for taking the time today. We really appreciate talking to you. Again, a very interesting background that you've led so far to bring you to the state assembly. And I know you're a hardworking guy, and you've done it for other folks. So I know you're gonna be able to do it for yourself, and we look forward to.
I hope it's perfect timing to use all my experience and do the job well and represent the district and the state.
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you.